Good evening, Baltimore. This is Harry Gray
and Coach Said.
This is Changing Baltimore.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is now time to get turned up with the number one DJ, DJ Main Event.
Welcome, Baltimore. Welcome, Baltimore. This is episode 14. I'm your host, Harry Gray.
And I'm your co-host, Coach Said.
And we are Changing Baltimore. I want to welcome everybody that's tuning in, everybody that's in the audience tonight. Sorry for our delay. We had some technical difficulties, but we are going to bring you a great and exciting show here tonight at Bo's Famous Seafood.
Absolutely.
Sponsored by Tone Drone LLC and Brainstream Media. Tonight, man, our guest is outstanding tonight.
Absolutely.
We're going to bring out here tonight Mr. Brandon Scott, the City Council President, Coach Michael Hampton from City College, and Coach Monroe from Lake Clifton Lakers. He has pretty much the game of the week this week, so we're going to talk about that. And we're going to dive in a little bit of some of the issues that's going on with Baltimore City High School sports, and probably about, I want to say, the state of Maryland with the transfer issues.
Absolutely.
So give me about 30 seconds. We're going to bring in Council President Mr. Brandon Scott. We'll be right back.
Are you ready? Yes, I am. 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 Are you ready?
Okay, welcome back, Baltimore. I'd like to introduce City Council President, Mr. Brandon Scott. Welcome aboard, sir.
What's up, Coach? Thanks for having me.
Thank you, man. It's been a long time trying to get you on the show, talk about some of the things that's happening in Baltimore City. You are from Baltimore. You're a Mervo grad, along with...
Go Mustangs. Another coach from Lake Clifton is waiting to come on. He's not waiting for that L he's going to catch on Friday, but we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, a graduate from St. Mary's College, where you majored in political science. Now, they don't have that at Mervo, so what made you get into political science?
It's always what I always wanted to do with my life was actually dedicate my life to service of Baltimore. When I was at Mervo, I was actually in computer programming, in addition, of course, to being a track athlete at Mervo. But if I wanted to do the change in my community, I always was taught that I had to do it myself. So when I went to St. Mary's, I decided to study at St. Mary's Political Science. St. Mary's College is Maryland's public honors college. It also has added the Center for the Study of Democracy, which is where the political science school is held. So this is why I chose it.
Right. We're going to get right into the meat of this, man. Baltimore has been under a lot of scrutiny from our youth to political, offices. And I know one of the things that you're going to do is try to change what Baltimore is and how it's perceived. On September the 9th, you were on the Larry Young Show, and you talked about the legislation and the policy proposal. Can you tell the public what that entails?
Oh, wow. How much time do I have, Coach?
Go ahead. You got some time.
All right, good. So, became council president on May the 6th. Clearly, we know we had some unfortunate incidents that led to changing of people in positions. I think that what we also have to remember and also acknowledge sometimes through bad things, through tragedies, through unfortunate incidents, great things happen, right? So for me to ascend to the council presidency, the youngest person to ever hold that position, for someone who grew up in Baltimore, came from Park Heights through Mervo, came back home after college to dedicate themselves to service, I think me being there was at the right time for the city, based on what the city has. But my job as the council president is to be the chief legislator for the city. And people told me that I had to continue to be myself, push the envelope, change the city, make sure that we change the way the city operates, make sure that we're doing things differently. And the easiest way for me to do that is through legislation. So I challenged my team to put forth, we could come up with a policy proposal, and we came up with one that was very expansive, very extensive, that we think can help get Baltimore's going. First and foremost, it's about rebuilding the government and rebuilding it a different way. And when you think about Baltimore City, I turned 35 years old this year, and Baltimore's government, the structure of Baltimore's government, its charter, which is how we operate as a government, has not changed since I've been alive, right? So if you understand that, and you understand what has happened in the city in the 35 years that I've been alive, you can see how they go along with each other. So the first thing that we did is we put forth a piece of legislation that will force the city to renew and review its charter every 10 years. Then also, when you look at our city is like a $3 billion business, right? And if you go to most businesses, large companies, you go to most cities, you go to even school systems, right? The chief executive and the chief operating person are not the same person. They're separate, because it's impossible for someone to do both of those jobs. However, in the city of Baltimore, unlike Baltimore County or Howard County or Washington, D.C., the mayor does both jobs. So we put forth a piece of legislation to create the office of the city administrator, like most cities have, so that we can separate those duties, allow our mayor, whoever that mayor is, to focus on the high-level executive issues, fixing our schools, dealing with crime, infrastructure, creating jobs, while the chief administrative officer will actually work on the day-to-day operation of the city, make sure the agencies are operating the way that they should. Then we move on just very quickly to crime. We all know that that's a hot button issue in the city. It's been one for a long time. As a former chair of the Public Safety Committee, that's where everyone knows me from, right? Yelling about policing, yelling about crime, trying to change that. And it's my humble opinion that what we have happening on the streets of Baltimore today is a direct result of failed leadership in the past. Meaning, you know this, Coach, for the previous 2.5 years, I was fighting with the previous mayor about why she didn't have a crime plan, why there was no coordinated effort from police, schools, recreation and parks, all these agencies on how they're going to deal with crime. And when you go 2.5 years without having one, you get what we get on the streets every day, utter chaos. So we're putting forth legislation actually on Monday that will mandate that every 2 years, the mayor, no matter who that is, presents a crime plan to the city council. So even though we now have one through the new police commissioner, so that we never have to go through that again. The other thing is, we know the focus on violent crime has always been around guns, right? But most of the violent crime in Baltimore is committed with the use of guns, and handguns in particular, for Baltimore City. However, the conversation is almost always about the person that pulled the trigger. We never dig down into where the guns come from, how they got to that place in the first place, right? Because we know that a good bit of the guns that are used on the streets of Baltimore, not only do they come from outside of the city, they come from outside the state. And we have this thing in Baltimore City called the Gun Offender Registry, right? Where if you commit a violent crime with a gun, you are a registered gun offender, much like a registered sex offender. We have to know who you are. They're going to contact you. They're going to do all the things that they do. However, I found it very interesting that people who get caught trafficking guns into Baltimore City, or someone who gets caught straw purchasing guns in Baltimore City, or even someone who gets caught buying a gun in order to give it to a minor in Baltimore City, will not have to be a gun offender. It's not considered a gun offender in Baltimore. So we put forth that legislation last week to make everybody who commits those crimes to be a gun offender, because we have to, if we're truly going to deal with it, we have to deal with the flow of violence, the flow of guns. When you're at war, you have to cut off the supply of the weapons used in war, and that's what we have to do with guns in Baltimore. And the last thing, two things that I'll mention are near and dear to what we guys normally talk about on this show, and that's young people. First and foremost, we're going to be pushing for the current commission funding so that Baltimore City Public Schools, which is owed $290 million a year for the last 10 years that the state has not been giving us, so that we get our money. But also that the city government itself puts more skin in the game. I've asked the finance department to present to the council a plan of how the city can increase its own funding for public schools, in addition to what the state needs to do on their level. And then we have this bill that was just passed out of committee yesterday that will create what we call the Youth Athletic Protection. We're actually going to be renaming that bill after a young man, McNair, who died at the University of Maryland this coming Monday, because unlike coaches, all the coaches here, yourself who coach in high school, who coach in USA track and field, AAU, USA football, major, little league baseball, all the soccer organizations that are recognized nationally. We all know that there's a growing number of youth sports teams do not participate in those larger leagues, right? And those young people should have the same protections. Their coaches should have the same training that you guys have to go through. And right now, a lot of those independent leagues, those independent teams, their coaches are not required to have training on recognizing child abuse or sexual assault. They're not required to have training on how to deal with concussions or cardiac arrest or heat exhaustion. All of these things are things that should be required. So when we pass this bill on Monday,